Hey everyone, so today we're talking all things edge alignment. So what is edge alignment? Edge alignment simply means that the edge of your blade is aligned and in line with the direction of the blade's movement. So if I have my sword out here and I do a vertical cut, then it means that the edge is pointing downwards and it's in line with the direction of motion. So if either of those two parts, the edge, direction of the edge or the motion, are off, then the edge won't be aligned. For example, if I turn the blade and I still move it downwards, then the edge won't be aligned. Or if I have the edge pointing downwards and I move it at an angle, then the edge won't be aligned. So why does edge alignment matter? Well, edge alignment matters for two big reasons. The first is if you're hitting a hard target and your edge alignment is wrong, then the forces on your blade aren't in the direction of the blade. So then you've got a weak point and the edge can chip, it can bend or it can warp, which isn't great for anyone. And the other reason, probably an even bigger reason, is that no matter what the target you're cutting, if your edge alignment is off, the target will be much harder to cut. As always on this channel, that we've got to ask ourselves the deeper questions: how much harder is it to cut when the edge alignment is off? So we can actually emulate and model the force required to cut through a target with a sword with this formula over here. And it looks pretty scary, but let's break it down. So F is proportional to K tan open brackets theta over 2 plus phi close brackets. So F is the force required to cut through the target, K is the coefficient of resistance, which changes depending on what target you've got and also what blade you're using, and theta is the angle of the blade's edge, and phi is the amount of degrees you are off for your edge alignment. So a perfect cut will have phi of 0. So this isn't a perfect formula. It doesn't account for things like the sword's sharpness. It assumes the sword is already sharp. And it also doesn't account for things like bad cuts where the direction is wrong, or if the target goes off the stand, or if it moves or it sways, things like that. But this is a pretty good model for what we want to use it for. So let's say that we have a katana and we are cutting through a tatami mat, then K roughly equals 3,750 all over 17. So if we have no edge alignment deficit, so 0 degrees of edge alignment deficit, it's a perfect cut, then we will say that is 100% of the force. Now let's say that we've got 5 degrees off. So suddenly this 100% of force goes up to 136% of force. So 5 degrees off has cost us 36% more force and more energy. If we say 10 degrees off, we go up to 170% of the force required. So we've gone a whole 70% up. 15 degrees off, then we go to 215%, and 20 degrees off, then we go to 261%. And these degrees are really small. If you think about how much 5 degrees is, 15 degrees, 20 degrees, then it's almost nothing. If you think about your blade edge, it's usually about 30 degrees. So half of your blade's edge, if you're off by that amount, suddenly you go up to double and 215% of the force required, more than double. So you can see that edge alignment makes it a lot easier, and wrong edge alignment makes it drastically harder. Alright, so now we've established that edge alignment is important. How do we get good edge alignment? And a lot of people jump to tachikaze, or sword wind, and they say listen for the sword wind. And I think that that should be far lower down on the list, and it's pretty overrated. So I think first and foremost should be your grip. So your grip on the sword should be one so that the sword doesn't spin in your hands. You know where the edge is because of how your hands are pointed, and also you're likely to follow through with the direction of the cut. So if your wrists are out, then that probably won't help. If your grip is loose and you don't know how to hold the sword properly, then that's obviously not going to help. So nice normal grip with your wrists in, that's first and foremost. Next up is what I like to say as the line. So I like to imagine all of my cuts go on a line. So I imagine the line through the target and I make sure that my edge and my motion follow through with that line. And as you get better, then that line becomes smaller, but to start with, then just start going up on that line and down on that line, rather than some sweeping cuts or crazy things like that. That can come later when your line is just at the target there, and you can visualize that and you can see that. Before that, then just bring it up on the line and down on the line, and that way you'll have pretty good edge alignment. The other thing is that you've really got to think about it. So if you consciously train thinking about the edge alignment, even when you're swinging a bokken or you're swinging your sword in the air, then you will probably have good edge alignment because you've thought about it, you're looking out for it. But if you swing your sword in the air 1,000 times, you swing your bokken 10,000 times, and you had no thought for edge alignment, then when you go to swing your sword for tamashigiri, your edge alignment will probably not be great. So thinking about it when you train, big step. And finally we get to tachikaze, or literally sword wind. So tachikaze is the sound caused by the sword moving and displacing air as it goes through the air. And it's caused by the turbulence of this displaced air, and that creates a sound. So generally speaking, the sharper and the cleaner the sound, the better your edge alignment. But there's a few factors that go into it. And if we look at that, we can just break down what factors affect wind turbulence. So the length of the blade is a big one. If you've got a shorter blade, less wind is displaced, so you don't get as much of a sound. So a short wakizashi may not even have an audible tachikaze, whereas a long katana probably will. Then we also get to bohi or no bohi. So bohi is the groove that runs along it, and that traps air and then causes it to push outwards as it splits through the air. And so then having a bohi will have more turbulence, louder sound. And the other thing is, what about how that bohi is made? If you've got a bohi with sharp, crisp edges, then they'll displace air better and with more turbulence, so you'll have a crisper, sharper sound with a crisp bohi. Whereas if you got one with very rounded edges and it's very shallow, then probably not such a loud one. And then finally we get to edge alignment. So if your edge alignment is wrong, then you will have less air being displaced, or less turbulence, so you'll have a softer sound, and it also won't sound as sharp and high-pitched. Now the problem with tachikaze is that just because you can hear it doesn't mean that it's right, and what is right is different for every sword. So if you imagine swinging a stick through the air, that creates a sound. It's not a sword, but it's wind being displaced, turbulence, all of that. So it's similar to a tachikaze. But the stick emulates a very flat angle, so if you swung a sword flat, you'd probably still make a sound similar to that. So you need to know what the right tachikaze for your sword sounds like already. And how I recommend doing that is if you take your sword and you do a fast vertical cut and you listen to the sound that that makes, then it will give you a good idea of what your tachikaze should sound like. And that will be your control. After that, then you try and emulate that sound with all of the cuts that you make with it. And if you do it that way, then you're probably close to having the right tachikaze for your sword. So I hope you learned a few things. In summary, edge alignment is important. Please train with good edge alignment. It makes it very difficult to cut, and also it can cause damage to your sword if your edge alignment is off. So that's all for today. Hope you learned something, and I'll see you next time.